All right, welcome. We're about to decode a 500-year-old idea that, and this might sound a little crazy, could be the hidden source code for our modern world. And yeah, even for our modern anxieties.
So let's kick things off with this quote from the philosopher Blaise Pascal. He's talking about original sin, and he calls it this incomprehensible mystery. Now you hear that and you think, okay, ancient history, right? But the whole point of the analysis we're diving into today is that the impact of this mystery is something we feel like right now, every single day.
And that brings us to the big question we're going to unpack here. How on earth did one monk's theological argument from way back in 1517, how did that draw a straight line to how we feel today? You know, our individualism, our anxiety, even the way we think about our own bodies. It sounds wild, but let's follow the thread.
Okay, so let's get right into it. The main argument here, and it's a bold one, is that a whole lot of our modern anxieties can be traced directly back to one specific thing, Martin Luther's take on original sin.
And to really get this, we have to wrap our heads around a huge shift in thinking. It's basically a move away from a logic of inclusion to a brand new logic of exclusion.
Okay, look at this. This slide really lays it all out. Before Luther, the thinking was all about et, which is just Latin for both and. See? Faith and works, grace and nature. They were a team, they worked together. But Luther's whole framework, his famous solas, it forces this ought choice. That's either or. Suddenly it's got to be faith alone or grace alone, no more and.
And this move, this either-or thinking, it created something the source calls Luther's razor. And it's a great image, right? It's like this razor just came in and sliced apart ideas that have been woven together for centuries. So what exactly did it cut apart? Let's take a look.
All right, so according to this analysis, we get these four great separations. And this isn't just theology. This becomes the operating system for a whole new worldview. First, boom, God is separated from man. There's this massive, uncrossable gap now. Second, grace gets separated from nature. So grace doesn't fix nature anymore, it just kind of covers up the corruption. Third, Christ is separated from the church as an institution, which makes your faith a totally personal, private thing. And finally, faith is separated from reason. Reason suddenly becomes a problem, an obstacle to true belief.
Yeah, sin is not removed, it's just hidden under the rug. This quote just perfectly captures this new and honestly super pessimistic view of humanity. The idea is that a person is just broken, fundamentally and forever. So forgiveness isn't about being healed or made whole, it's just God basically agreeing to look the other way, to not hold your sin against you. But the mess? Oh, it's still there. Just, swept under the rug.
So you might be thinking, okay, that's interesting theology, but what's that got to do with me? Well, here's the thing. The source argues that these huge separations didn't just stay inside church walls. Nope, they spilled out into the wider culture, and over a few hundred years, they created three massive forces that pretty much define the world we live in today.
And these three big isms, which all grew out of that either-or way of thinking, really became the pillars of our modern world.
First up, you get spiritualism. Now follow the logic here. If nature is corrupt and separate from grace, well, where do you go? You retreat into the only pure thing left, the spirit. Your body becomes just a machine, a shell that isn't the real you. You can see this idea pop up with Descartes, separating the mind from the body. And we still see echoes of this today, right? Think about how some wellness culture treats the body like this project you have to manage, totally separate from your mind or your true self.
Okay, so for every action, there's a reaction, right? So the inevitable pushback against all that was naturalism. People started saying, hey, if God and nature are totally separate, then why not just stick with nature? Thinkers like Rousseau basically flipped the whole thing on its head. They argued that nature, all by itself, was actually fundamentally good. This is where you get ideas like the noble savage.
And this all leads to what is maybe the most powerful force of them all, individualism. I mean, think about it. If your faith is just a direct phone line to God, and you don't need the church or anybody else in between, well, who becomes the ultimate authority? You do, yourself. Salvation, morality, it all becomes this private, personal project. It's the ancestor of the whole spiritual but not religious idea, or even the way we curate our social media to be this perfect monument to our individual selves.
So, okay, that's a lot of big isms and history. But the big question is, how does any of this actually show up in our day-to-day lives? To really connect those dots, let's look at a story. It's simple, but it's really powerful.
So picture this. You've got a Nobel Prize winner and his wife, and they're driving through the desert. So on the one hand, you have the absolute peak
peak of success, right? A Nobel Prize. But on the other, they're totally isolated, driving through this huge, empty landscape.
They pull over for gas at this lonely station, and something unexpected happens. The wife recognizes the guy working the pump. It's her old high school boyfriend, Charles. They have a nice chat, this little warm, human moment out there in the middle of nowhere.
They get back in the car, and after a few miles of silence, the husband says, kind of smugly, "Good thing you married me. Otherwise, you'd be the wife of a gas station attendant." And there it is. That is the voice of radical individualism in a nutshell. His success is his. He's the self-made man. And her value, in his eyes, comes only from being attached to his achievement. But her reply just completely flips the script. She says, "My dear, if I had married him, he would be the Nobel Prize winner." And with that one line, she just demolishes his entire worldview, the whole idea of the self-made man.
What she's saying, her point, and this is really the core critique in the source material we're looking at, is that we aren't just these isolated atoms bouncing around. Our lives, who we are, what we achieve, it's all profoundly shaped by our relationships, by our community. Our existence is received, you could say, not built from scratch in a vacuum. It's a huge vote for solidarity, and it's a direct challenge to that legacy we talked about, that idea of salvation being just me alone with my God.
And so that leaves us with a pretty big question to chew on, doesn't it? The argument we've explored today suggests that the way a monk thought about God 500 years ago actually laid the groundwork for how we think about ourselves today. It really makes you wonder just how much of our world, our culture, our anxieties is still built on these great separations. And maybe more importantly, what would it even look like to start putting some of those pieces back together?